Chapter 10 of Inside the Lines by Earl Biggers and Robert Ritchie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Visit to a Lady. Turning to consider the never-stale fortunes of one of Fate's beanbags. Mr. Billy Capper, ejected from the Hotel Splendide, took little umbrage at such treatment. It was not an uncommon experience, and, besides, a quiet triumph that would not be dampened by trifles filled his soul. Cheerfully he pushed through the motley crowd on Waterport Street down to the lower levels of the city by the Line Wall, where the roosts of sailors and warrens of quondam adventurers off all the seven seas made far more congenial atmosphere than that of the Splendide's hollow pretense. He chose a hostelry more commensurate with his slender purse than Almer's, though as a matter of fact the question of paying a hotel bill was furthest from Billy Capper's thoughts. Such formal transactions he avoided whenever feasible. The proprietor of the San Roque, where Capper took a room, had such an evil eye that his new guest made a mental note that perhaps he might have to leave his bag behind when he decamped. Capper abhorred violence to his own person. Alone over a glass of thin wine, the champagne days, alas, had been too fleeting. Capper took stock of his situation and conned the developments he hoped to be the instrument for starting. To begin with, finances were wretchedly bad, and that was a circumstance so near the ordinary for Capper that he shuddered as he pulled a gold guinea and a few silver bits from his pocket, and mechanically counted them over. Of the 300 marks Louisa, pretty snake, had given him in the Café Riche and the expense money he had received from her the following day to cover his expedition to Alexandria for the Wilhelmstrasse, naught but this paltry residue. That second cabin ticket on the Princess Mary had taken the last big bite from his hoard, and here he was in this black and tan town with a quid and little more between himself and the old starved dog life. But, and Capper narrowed his eyes and sagely wagged his head, there'd be something fat coming. When he got knee to knee with the Governor General of the Rock and told him what he, Billy Capper, knew about the identity of Captain Woodhouse, newly transferred to the signal service at Gibraltar, why, if there wasn't a cool £50 or a matter of that as honorarium from a generous government, Billy Capper had missed his guess. That's all. "I say, Governor, of course this is very handsome of you, but I didn't come to tell what I know for gold. I'm a loyal Englishman, and I've done what I have for the good of the old flag." "Quite right, Mr. Capper, quite right. But you will please accept this little gift as an inadequate recognition of your loyalty. Your name shall be mentioned in my dispatches home." Capper rehearsed this hypothetical dialogue with relish. He could even catch the involuntary gasp of astonishment from the governor when that responsible officer in His Majesty's service heard the words Capper would whisper to him, could see the commander of the Rock open a drawer in his desk and take therefrom a thick white sheaf of bank notes, count them. Then, then, the first train for Paris and the delights of Paris at wartime prices. The little spy anticipated no difficulty in gaining audience with the governor. Before he had been 15 minutes off the Princess Mary, he had heard the name of the present incumbent of Government House. Crandall, Sir George Crandall, the same who had been in command of the forts at Rangoon back in '99. Oh, yes, Capper knew him, and he made no doubt that, if properly reminded of a certain bit of work Billy Capper had done in the Burmese city, Sir George would recall him, and with every reason for gratefulness. Tomorrow, yes, before even Sir George had had his morning's peg, Capper would present himself at Government House and tell about that house on Queen's Terrace at Ramleh, about the unconscious British officer who was carried there and hurried thence by night, and the tall well-knit man in conference with Dr. Koch, who was now come to be a part of the garrison of the Rock under the stolen name of Woodhouse. Capper had his dinner, then strolled around the town to see the sights and hear what he could hear. Listening was a passion with him. For the color and the exotic savor of Gibraltar on a hot August night, Capper had no eye. The knife edge of a moon slicing the battlements of the old Moorish castle up on the heights; the minor tinkle of a guitar sounding from a vine-curtained balcony; a Riffian muleteer's sing-song review of his fractious beast's degraded ancestry not for these incidentals did the practical mind under the battered Capper bowler have room. Rather, the scraps of information and gossip passed from one blue-coated artilleryman off duty to another over a mug of ale, or the confidence of a slow-eyed dancer to the guitar player in a tavern. This was meat for Capper. Carefully he husbanded his gold piece, and judiciously he spent his silver for drink. He enjoyed himself in the ascetic spirit of a monk in a fast, believing that the morrow would bring champagne in place of the thin wine his pitiful silver could command. Then, of a sudden, he caught a glimpse of Louisa of the Wilhelmstrasse. Capper's heart skipped, and an involuntary impulse crooked his fingers into claws. The girl was just coming out of a café, the only café aspiring to Parisian smartness Gibraltar boasts. Her head was bare. Under an arm she had tucked a stack of cigar boxes. Had it not been that a steady light from an overhead arc cut her features out of the soft shadow with the fineness of a diamond-pointed tool, Capper would have sworn his eyes were playing him tricks. But Louisa's features were unmistakable, whether in the Lucullan surroundings of a Berlin summer garden or here on a street in Gibraltar. Capper had instinctively crushed himself against the nearest wall on seeing the girl. The crowd had come between himself and her, and she had not seen him. All the weasel instinct of the man came instantly to the fore that second of recognition, and the glint in his eyes and baring of his teeth were flashed from brute instinct, the instinct of the night-prowling meat-hunter. All the vicious hate which the soul of Billy Capper could distill flooded to his eyes and made them venomous. Slinking, dodging, covering, he followed the girl with the cigar boxes. She entered several dance halls, offered her wares at the door of a cheap hotel. For more than an hour Capper shadowed her through the twisting streets of the old Spanish town. Finally she turned into a narrow lane, climbed flagstone steps, set the width of the lane to a house under the scarp of a cliff, and let herself in at the street door. Capper, following to the door as quickly as he dared, found it locked. The little spy was choking with a lust to kill. His whole body trembled under the pulse of a murderous passion. He had found Louisa, the girl who had sold him out, and for her private ends, Capper made no doubt of that. Some day he had hoped to run her down, and with his fingers about her soft throat, to tell her how dangerous it was to trick Billy Capper. But to have her flung across his path this way, when anger was still at white heat in him, this was luck. He'd see this Louisa and have a little powwow with her, even if he had to break his way into the house. Capper felt the doorknob again. The door wouldn't yield. He drew back a bit and looked up at the front of the house. Just a dingy black wall with 3 unlighted windows set in it irregularly. The roof projected over the gabled attic like the visor of a cap. Beyond the farther corner of the house were 10 feet of garden space, and then the bold rock of the cliff springing upward. A low wall bounded the garden. Over its top nodded the pale ghosts of moonflowers and oleanders. Capper was over the wall in a bound, and crouching amid flower clusters, listening for possible alarm. None came, and he became bolder. Skirting a tiny arbor, he skulked to a position in the rear of the house. There a broad patch of illumination stretched across the garden, coming from 2 French windows on the lower floor. They stood half open. Through the thin white stuff hanging behind them, Capper could see vaguely the figure of a girl seated before a dressing mirror, with her hands busy over 2 heavy ropes of hair. Nothing to do but step up on the little half balcony outside the windows, push through into the room and have a little powwow with Louisa. An unwonted boldness had a grip on the little spy. Never a person to force a face-to-face issue when the trick could be turned behind somebody's back, he was, nevertheless, driven irresistibly by a furious anger that took no heed of consequences. With the light foot of a cat, Capper straddled the low rail of the balcony, pushed back one of the partly opened windows, and stepped into Louisa's room. His eyes registered mechanically the details: a heavy canopied bed, a massive highboy of some dark wood, chairs supporting carelessly flung bits of wearing apparel. But he noted especially that just as he emerged from behind one of the loose curtains, a white arm remained poised over a brown head. "Stop where you are, Billy Capper." The girl's low-spoken order was as cold and tense as drawn wire. No trace of shock or surprise was in her voice. She did not turn her head. Capper was brought up short, as if he felt a noose about his neck. Slowly the figure seated before the dressing mirror turned to face him. Tumbling hair framed the girl's face, partly veiling the yellow-brown eyes, which seemed two spots of metal coming to incandescence under heat. Her hands, one still holding a comb, lay supinely in her lap. "I admit this is a surprise, Capper," Louisa said, letting each word fall sharply, but without emphasis. "However, it is like you to be unconventional. May I ask what you want this time, besides money, of course?" Capper wet his lips and smiled wryly. He had jumped so swiftly to impulse that he had not prepared himself beforehand against the moment when he should be face to face with the girl from the Wilhelmstrasse. Moreover, he had expected to be closer to her, very close indeed, before the time for words should come. I saw you tonight and followed you here," he began lamely. "Flattering," she laughed shortly. "Oh, you needn't try to come it over me with words." Capper's teeth showed in a nasty grin as his rage flared back from the first suppression of surprise. "I've come here to have a settlement for a little affair between you and me." "Blackmail? Why, Billy Capper, how true to form you run!" The yellow-brown eyes were alight and burning now. "Have you determined the sum you want, or are you in the open market?" Capper grinned again, and shifted his weight, inadvertently advancing one foot a little nearer the seated girl as he did so. "Pretty quick with the tongue, as always," he sneered. "But this time it doesn't go, Louisa. You pay differently this time. Pay for selling me out. Understand?" Again one foot shifted forward a few inches by the accident of some slight body movement on the man's part. Louisa still sat before her dressing mirror, hands carelessly crossed on her lap. "Selling you out?" she repeated evenly. "Oh, so you finally did discover that you were elected to be the goat? Brilliant, Capper! How long before you made up your mind you had a grievance?" The girl's cool admission goaded the little man's fury to frenzy. His mind craved for action, for the leap and the tightening of fingers around that taunting throat. But somehow his body, strangely detached from the fiat of volition, as if it were another's body, lagged to the command. Violence had never been its mission. Muscles were slow to accept this new conception of the mind. But the man's feet followed their crafty intelligence. By fractions of inches they moved forward stealthily. "You wouldn't be here now," Louisa coldly went on, "if you weren't Fortune's bright-eyed boy. You were slated to be taken off the boat at Malta and shot. The boat didn't stop at Malta through no fault of ours, and so you arrived at Alexandria and became a nuisance." One of the girl's hands lifted from her lap and lazily played along the edge of the rosewood standard which supported the mirror on the dressing table. It stopped at a curiously carved rosette in the rococo scroll-work. Capper's suspicious eye noted the movement. He sparred for time, the time needed by those stealthy feet to shorten the distance between themselves and the girl. "Why," he hissed, "why did you give me a number with the Wilhelmstrasse and send me to Alexandria if I was to be caught and shot at Malta? That's what I'm here to find out." "Excellent, Capper." Her fingers were playing with the convolutions of the carved rosette. "Intelligent, Capper. He comes to a lady's room at night to find the answer to a simple question. He shall have it. He evidently does not know the method of the Wilhelmstrasse, which is to choose 2 men for every task to be accomplished. One, the target, we call him, goes first. Our friends, whose secrets we seek, are allowed to become suspicious of him. We even give them a hint to help them in their suspicion. They seize the target, and in time of war he becomes a real target for a firing squad, as you should have been, Capper, at Malta. Then, when our friends believe they have nipped our move in the bud, follows the second man, who turns the trick." Capper was still wrestling with that baffling stubbornness of the body. Each word the girl uttered was like vitriol on his writhing soul. His mind willed murder, willed it with all the strength of hate, but still the springs of his body were cramped. By what? Not cowardice, for he was beyond reckoning results. Certainly not compassion or any saving virtue of chivalry. Why did his eyes constantly stray to that white hand lifted to allow the fingers to play with the filigree of wood on the mirror support? "Then you engineered the stealing of my number from the hollow under the handle of my cane sometime between Paris and Alexandria?" he challenged in a whisper, his face thrust forward between hunched shoulders. "No, indeed. It was necessary for you to have the evidence in your possession when the English searched you at Malta. But the loss of your number is not news. Koch in Alexandria has reported, of course." The girl saw Capper's foot steal forward again. He was not 6 feet from her now. His wiry body settled itself ever so slightly for a spring. Louisa rose from her chair, one hand still resting on the wooden rosette of the mirror standard. She began to speak in a voice drained of all emotion. "You followed me here to night, Billy Capper, imagining in your poor little soul that you were going to do something desperate, something really human and brutal. You came in my window all primed for murder, but your poor little soul all went to water the instant we faced each other. You couldn't nerve yourself to leap upon a woman even. You can't now." She smiled on him, a woman's flaying smile of pity. Capper writhed, and his features twisted themselves in a paroxysm of hate. "I have my finger on a bell button here, Capper. If I press it, men will come in here and kill you without asking a question. Now you'd better go." Capper's eyes jumped to focus on a round white nib under one of the girl's fingers there on the mirror's standard. The little ivory button was alive, a sentient thing suddenly allied against him. That inanimate object rather than Louisa's words sent fingers of cold fear to grip his heart. A little ivory button waiting there to trap him. He tried to cover his vanished resolution with bluster, sputtering out in a tense whisper: "You're a devil from hell, Louisa. But I'll get you. They shoot women in wartime. Sir George Crandall, I know him. I did a little service for him once in Rangoon. He'll hear of you and your Wilhelmstrasse tricks, and you'll have your pretty back against a wall with guns at your heart before tomorrow night. Remember, before tomorrow night." Capper was backing toward the open window behind him. The girl still stood by the mirror, her hand lightly resting where the ivory nib was. She laughed. "Very well, Billy Capper. It will be a firing party for 2, you and me together. I'll make a frank confession, tell all the information Billy Capper sold to me for 300 marks one night in the Café Riche, the story of the Anglo-Belgian defense arrangements. The same Billy Capper, I'll say, who sold the Lord Fisher letters to the Kaiser. A cable to Downing Street will confirm that identification inside of 2 hours. And then—" "And your Captain Woodhouse, your cute little Wilhelmstrasse captain," Capper flung back from the window, pretending not to heed the girl's potent threat. "I know all about him, and the governor'll too, same time he hears about you." "Good night, Billy Capper," Louisa answered, with a piquant smile. "And au revoir until we meet with our backs against that wall." Capper's head dropped from view over the balcony edge. There was a sound of running feet amid the close-ranked plants in the garden, then silence. The girl from the Wilhelmstrasse, alone in the house, save for the bent old housekeeper asleep in her attic, turned and laid her head, a bit weakly, against the carved standard, where in a florid rosette showed the ivory tip of the hinge for the cheval glass. End of chapter 10.